I'm going to get right into Ann's talk here because she has a lot to talk about. Ann Spafford is our landscape design instructor in the Department of Horticultural Science. She's written a book on rain gardening, which is a fantastic book. She's done a lot of, if you go on campus and you see really interesting things going on there, probably Ann and her class have had their hands in that. Fantastically knowledgeable person about kind of a whole range of things. If you ever get a chance to hear her talk about you know, pollinators, or take a whole design class with her, you know, Bryce you get for a couple of days here, but Ann, you can come back to school and get your design degree with her. So I'm going to turn it over to Ann, who's going to talk about important landscape design issues.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everybody. Enjoy your snack. Excellent. I have to confess that I feel a little weird, like coming in when someone says, "Hey, can you give a morning workshop on landscape design or an hour class on landscape design?" Because there's a lot to it. Anyone feel really comfortable doing their own landscape design? Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, but I love a lot of the things that Bryce said this morning, because landscape design can be just as flexible and unintimidating as planting. You just need to kind of relax about it. So when I put this talk together, I'm like, oh my gosh, I only have an hour. What can I communicate in an hour that would benefit new gardeners, some experienced gardeners? What can I possibly do? So I still do some designing on the side, and I bring a lot of real-world projects to my students. Pat is one of our clients from the studio, and so in both of those scenarios, I'm like, okay, well, what topics typically come up? What are the biggies that people have the most questions about or have experienced the most hurdles with? So I put together a talk that has some of the main things that I hear about most often. Bryce was excellent this morning. I probably talk just as fast as he does, if not more. I tell my students, oh, it's usually because I'm really passionate about something, but also it's like it could be that I'm highly caffeinated. That would help us if it's both. Just in case you haven't noticed, I have tea and Red Bull going this morning. So I was up early tweaking this presentation for you. So we'll see how it goes. There's probably some changes that I forgot. So landscape design is, of course, the outdoor space creation through art, land and soil, water, plants, and structures for people and their pets, right? So in a nutshell, we want to think about landscape design having two parts, the functional aspect and the aesthetic aspect. And really, if a landscape that's beautiful is the lowest common denominator, it should be able to, you should be able to do what you want to do in your landscape, right? So we'll talk about that. So function is having it designed the way for you to be able to go outside and to do the things that you want to do. Aesthetic is making sure that it looks good. You know, and that's a little squirrely, but we'll get into why that is in a second. So motivation is most important. I tell my students they need to ask their clients not just what they want, but why they want what they want. So a very common conversation I have with homeowners is the homeowner says, I want a Bradford pear in my front yard. And I'm like, really? I try not to be super judgy, but you guys know that tree? Yeah. Right? So someone just yell out what those flowers smell like. Fish? Lots of things. It's usually fish and dirty socks. Not together, but that's how people interpret it, right? So it's just a really common tree. It's overused. It's starting to escape. The flowers, they look pretty, but they really do smell bad, right? So, but a lot of builders and developers will just stick that in the front yard as, here's your tree. And so when a homeowner says, I want a Bradford pear in my front yard, that's not really what they want. And I ask, and they're like, well, my neighbor has one, so that's what I should have. And it's just that they don't know what their options are. And that's our job as designers, right? I consider myself a facilitator of your dreams, right? So you tell me what it is you are wanting, needing, desiring, and I figure out how to put that together for you, right? I'm not just doing some awesome ideas that come out of my weird brain for you. They've got to come from you and your site. right? So aesthetics. Did someone just go woo? Was that a good woo or a bad woo? I couldn't really tell, right? So aesthetics is just the beauty, right? A landscape that's just beautiful, but that doesn't allow you to do what you need to do, it's missing the mark, hugely. That's bad design. But the hard part is everyone has a different definition of what's beautiful. Like, how many of you love these pictures on the screen right now? How many think it's just, no, I would never do that in my yard? No one's going to say, it's not my yard. You can dig it all you want. So where you fall aesthetically, that's completely your own. And you can do whatever you want in your yard. I will tell you in a little bit that color combinations, there's really no bad or wrong color combination anymore. So we'll talk about how do you figure out what is beautiful for you, right? Okay. Everybody's different. Somebody loves this. How do we know? Well, lots of little gnomes, but look, someone is afraid that something's going to go missing. There's barbed wire, right? So someone loves this, and it means a great deal to them. Might not be your cup of tea, might not be my cup of tea, totally fine. I don't live there. It doesn't matter, right? I like chocolate, you like vanilla, opinions don't matter, right? So what you need to do is take a lot of time and drill down what is most important to you, right? You do this, right? I love my cat. I am not a crazy cat lady. Technically, you have to have more than one cat for that title to be earned. I just have the one. So you take a lot of time in figuring out what car you're going to buy, right? You think about what you need. It's like, I need a big vehicle to haul a lot of stuff. If you come to that conclusion, you're not going to buy a Pinto or a Fiat or whatever, right? So you have to think the same careful thoughts about what you want and need in your landscape. So I'm going to take you through a few pictures of my place. So in my house, it's just me and this awesome, handsome beastie. So I don't need to worry about anyone else's aesthetic preferences. Ha-ha, it's all me. But I tell you, I was married long ago, far away, and my husband and I had completely different tastes, but we got it to work, right? So you can blend things when opinions and tastes are different, right? So here's my house. I live in a really cool neighborhood just north of downtown Raleigh. I'm from Illinois originally, where I did love to garden. We were really spoiled with topsoil, and I think like most of us, even professional gardeners, professional horticulturalists, we move here thinking, I know what I'm doing, and then you fail miserably the first year. So when I bought this house in 2006, it's small. All these homes were built in the 1940s for veterans coming back from World War II. So they're little starter homes, really solid construction. They're all 1,000 square feet. So since the house footprint is so small, the quarter-acre lot actually feels a really nice size because the house isn't taking up all that space, right? So that's what it looked like when I bought it. Nothing special, right? Solid house, not that architecturally interesting. I almost didn't buy it because I hated this roof line so much. That shed roof that just comes down, it's pretty much saying, don't bother coming up here. Go away, I don't want any guests, right? But I'm like, well, the roof is fine. It's not, doesn't need to be replaced, but I'll change out the porch when the roof is ready to be redone, right? I'm very frugal with my money. When I have clients, I help them spend their money wisely. Now, my functional requirements for my quarter-acre lot, I don't want you to read all of that. I mean, you can if you're a speed reader, but it's a lot, right? It's like, oh my gosh, can I actually fit all of that on? And most people, most homeowners have this same issue. Whether you have a small lot with a big house on it or a bigger lot, you still probably want your landscape to do a lot. Right? So how do we get it all in there? Do you just automatically assume, nope, I'm not going to fit, I need to prioritize, and I'm going to eliminate half of this? No. I've really thought carefully about what I want. This stuff would make me so happy if I could fit it all in. So then that's the challenge. That's the puzzle. How do you make it work, right? So we'll come back around to that long list in a second. The other thing is my aesthetic preferences. This is often much harder to articulate, right? So if you can describe what it is you like, is it color preferences? Like, I love color, hands down, whatever it is, I like it, but I really love purple. I'm surprised I'm not wearing it today. If I could describe my landscape wish in one word, it'd be funky. I don't want what anyone else has. I want something different, I want something unique, I want people to be driving down the street going, whoa, that must be where Ann lives, because it's weird, right? So I like weird stuff. So I like to write this out for myself so I don't vary, right? If you are hiring a designer, you still want to do this because it helps you articulate to the designer your preferences so they can hit the mark right out of the gate. In this day and age, we have wonderful Pinterest, right? Instead of like writing it out, I'm old school. I've lived most of my life without Pinterest, right? But I have some clients who they'll just start saving images of gardens and landscapes that they like, and then they share their Pinterest folder with me. So if you're not good at articulating, show me pictures, right? Pictures are worth 1,000 words, right? So I have some weird things. I want things that are edgy. I want it welcoming and inviting, yet private. A lot of things that seem like they're in opposition, right? So, but it's a pretty decent list. I like wild things, but as a whole, my neighbors like to see, and probably your neighbors too, like to see some order. Definitely man-made or human-made. I do teach an online class for non-majors in the summer, and I start out by asking them to find a picture of a landscape they find attractive online and to tell me why they think it's attractive. And of course, every year I think that they're going to say, oh, it's pretty, it's colorful, it's beautiful. Nope, neat, clean, tidy. Really? It's like you realize you're outside, right? So, like spiral surprises, unexpected things, and I'm a huge fan of Pete Udolph, James Hitchmore, and Noel Kingsbury. And they're designers from, Pete is from the Netherlands, James and Noel are from the UK. And they love perennials. I love perennials. They like wild plantings. I like wild plantings. So they do designs more like this, right? So this is a Pete Udolph design. If you like perennials, that's a name you're going to want to know. There is, Eileen reminded me, there's a movie playing at Cary Theater about Pete's gardens called like 5 Seasons. I saw it the other day. It's amazing. But I'm a little biased. I have all of his books. I go through them. I put my Post-it note. I write in the margins. It's an amazing, amazing designer. The movie's great. So it's playing tomorrow. Right? So yeah, at the Cary Theater, right? Right. So he uses a lot of perennials, right? So of course flowers are important. Foliage textures, foliage colors. He really doesn't use that much woody plant material. Like trees and shrubs, he's all about this herbaceous growth, right? So I'm like-minded like that as well. So, like I said, I want to do weird things. This is like a plan of my front yard. Just an idea I was tinkering around with when I first moved in. I'm like, oh man, I'm a landscape history buff too. How cool would it be to have a knot garden in my front yard? Like low clipped hedges that they're usually, like you see it in European design all the time. Really neat and tidy, but I wanted mine to kind of escape and start unraveling and becoming unkempt. How, wouldn't that be awesome? Or would you just like hate to be my neighbor? I hate to be my neighbor. But the reason I didn't do this is like I love like retail therapy and I love buying plants, but the thought of buying like 60 of whatever this purple thing would have been, it's like I can't buy 60 of one thing, and then this green hedge would have been like 120 or more of one thing. It's like, oh my God, I just can't imagine like buying that and then having to plant the same thing over and over again. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I still have the sketch because I still love it. I'm like, maybe I'll come back around to it, but probably not, right? So I changed gears, right? So I love circles. I'm like, all right, I really want something curvy in my front yard. And if you just bought a new house or are about to move into a new house, my first big piece of advice is to just wait. Live with it for a while. See what it's like. That gives you time to check out where it's sunny, where it's shady, like what Bryce was talking about. But also, how do you walk across your landscape? Do you use one path more than another one? Do you need like a solid walkway? Do you need something smaller? I really wanted to try out this curvy thing, so I wasn't in a rush. And I'm like, I'm just going to spray out my design with contractor's marking paint. And I'm just going to walk those paths. So if I was going out to the street, I would walk this one. If I was going over to where my car was parked, I would take this path. And it was really cool. I liked it, but whenever you do circles, it starts to create some weird angles, and it would give me a lot of turf or whatever in the middle, but not a lot of other bed space. And then this, as a bed space, would have been an awful lot of plants. So I just wasn't sold on it, right? So again, I'm waiting until I know for sure so I can spend my money the right way. So I ended up simplifying. It's like, all right, my house, this is still my house, but now I've painted it. I re-roofed it with a metal roof, and I changed the porch line so it's much more welcoming. And I just did bluestone. I redid the porch. This made wide, welcoming front steps. So this is all bluestone. These are actually poured in place concrete pads that are barely colored to be the same blue, and then it ends at the street. I'm pointing as if you can actually see, but about here, there's like another bluestone pad at the street, and then this is also bluestone here before you get to my driveway. New sod, and then all of this was going to be wild perennials, right? So it's still kind of wild, but the straight edges gives it order and neatness. It gives me just enough lawn to play really, really mean games of croquet, right? I'm highly competitive, right? So that's how it started. And then I've just been like playing with the perennials ever since. And I didn't really become like a huge, massive fan of Pete Udolph and James Hitchmore until like a couple of years ago, and I just didn't want to like take up everything and start again, but that's really what I want in those beds. So I'm okay, I need to just do that. So this winter, I'm gonna take everything out and start prepping the beds for that redo. But I really love it. My garden looks different almost every day, right? So by earlier this summer, I do have like a mini prairie section along the street, perennials all along the walkway. Many are pollinator friendly, of course. I have apple trees across the front, which I knew I shouldn't plant, but I just couldn't help myself. Gardeners do that a lot. Get used to it. I have 8 fruit trees. I have dwarf blueberries along the driveway, veggies also along the driveway. But I also work like 60, 65 hours a week. I'm a single person household, so there's a reason why I like zoomed in on some plans, because like it doesn't all look great at the moment. Like, I'm not going to show them that. They're never going to listen to anything I have to say after that. So it's still filling in, but I'll be redoing it. So large wish list, tight spaces, coming back around to that long list that I had. So one of the things that's really clever to do in your landscape is to stack functions. Like, how can I have one garden element do more than one thing, right? That's a huge space saver, right? So my friend Will, who you might have taken a class here with, he teaches out here as well, Will Hooker. He used to teach our permaculture class at the university. Now he kind of teaches them out and about. Amazing resource, right? So when his son was young, he and his wife Gina wanted to put in a fence so Eli didn't run into the road. So they needed a fence, right? But their yard was even smaller than mine, right? So like, all right, we want this fence, but we also wanted to do something else. So he planted apple trees along the fence. They're really small. They're just like little whips. And he's started them small on purpose because he'll graft them together. They grow together, and then this is just a temporary fence structure. That bamboo comes out, and the apples that have woven together form this beautiful fence, right? So now he has the fence, but now he has beautiful spring flowers, and then in a good year, here we'll have some apples, right? And it's just beautiful. So that fence is doing 3 things, right? So that's excellent. So that's really smart. That one thing is performing multifunctions. Any garden you can like throw out can be more than one thing. Like, yeah, I talk about rain gardens a lot. Rain gardens that collect and let storm water infiltrate slowly, irrigates the plants. Those rain garden plants can also be good pollinator plants. right? So you can like double stack any garden. Labyrinths are kind of an up-and-coming thing. They've been, of course, used in Europe for 1,000 years or more. But here, if someone wants a labyrinth, which is just this walking, meditative path, you can have it all be paving. And so then it's patio and labyrinth instead of two separate things that take up space. Any garden structure you have, if you need to screen your neighbors, like I have a neighbor that has 2 little dogs that bark constantly, structures are a great way to buffer that. Right? They only bark when they see me, so if I've got a structure there, they can't see me, but it also buffers the noise a little bit. Right? So think about how we're putting in your garden can serve multiple functions. This is my favorite examples from Will and Gina's house. They have chickens, and so the chickens in this area need shade, right? So they have a grapevine growing up and over their coop. They picked a grapevine because the humans get fruit, right? The chickens actually like nibbling on the fruit that falls as well. But when we get our infestation of Japanese beetles in the summer, guess what their favorite food is? Grapevines. Right, so Will and Gina just go down to their coop early in the morning, they shake a column, and all those Japanese beetles drop in defense, and the chickens eat them. Right, so then the chickens get good protein. So basically, this chicken coop and run is a big Japanese beetle trap. Genius, right? Yes, I love it. Now you may, like in Raleigh, how many live in Raleigh? How many in Durham? All right, so I don't know what Durham's requirements are. In Raleigh, you're allowed to have chickens.
Not in Durham.
You're not in Durham, but your neighborhood might have different rules, right? If your neighborhood says, nope, you can't have chickens in Raleigh, then you can't have chickens. So the stricter covenant always prevails. Sad to say, but that's just the way it is. So always check, always do your homework. Right? You also could have goats, which we have a really cool farm north of Durham called Prodigal Goat Farm. They make good cheese, and every once in a while they open up their farm. See, now I have like a million slides to get through, and I'm going off topic, but this is important, right? So, like in Wake County, if you have up to an acre, you're allowed to have 1 regular-sized goat or 2 miniature goats. But goats are herding animals, right? And so 1 goat would be a really, really sad animal. So you're almost always defaulted to like the 2 goats, just FYI, right? So always do your homework, always do your homework. All right, so getting back to the chickens, the other thing you can do is put your compost pile in your chicken run, right? I don't want to say I'm lazy, but I like to say that my approach at my home garden is like laissez-faire, like the less I have to do, the better. I just want to enjoy it. I don't want to have to work out there. So if you put your compost pile in your chicken run, the chickens will turn it. Ha! One less task I don't have to do. Brilliant, brilliant. All right, then if you absolutely feel you have to have a peach tree, peaches are very, very hard to grow here, especially organic, no spraying. They're just tough. Will put his peach tree in his chicken run. So he had a section that had fencing over the top, so his chickens didn't get picked off by hawks. Then he had an open section, and he put his peach tree in the open section. So the biggest pest to peach trees in this area is a borer insect, borer. It's the red bull, not the enunciate. And they overwinter in the ground, and when they come up, guess what? The chickens eat them. So he always had beautiful peaches until the squirrels picked them off. So he so rarely got peaches, he's like, forget it, I'm not trying anymore. But he had the best scenario. Now I have friends who live in Durham, they're like, we grow peaches fine. So what Bryce didn't mention in his talk is, guess what, plants don't read books, right? They don't know necessarily how big they're supposed to get or how they're supposed to grow. So conditions change, and sometimes there are exceptions to the rule, and you can get something to grow that your neighbor can't, and vice versa. So gardening is very flexible that way. All right, so taking this really cool idea of stacking functions, when I apply that to my huge list, everything, so this is actually one chunk of information. Here's a chunk, here's a chunk. So those are things that actually dovetail together really nicely, right? So I could, this patio that I wanted, I can combine it with an outdoor workspace for construction projects. I just need someplace level, right? And then my labyrinth could just be in the paving pattern. So that's 3 things I can knock off my list with this one patio. And all these other things, garden shed with a green roof, screening from neighbors in the backyard, that clumps together really nicely. We just talked about the chickens, composting the grapes. So now my list is much more manageable. Does that make sense? Great. So doing this legwork up front really ensures that you're thinking very carefully about what's important to you, and then making sure that you're spending your time and money and energy wisely the first time. Like, yeah, we're going to move some plants around. I still do it, we all do it, right? That's fine, totally fine. But when it comes to bigger things like walkway layout and paying for hardscaping, you don't want to have to spend that money twice, right? We have to be really careful and make right decisions there. So this helps. This goes a long way. All right, so common landscape problems. I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. I'm not sure all what you're dealing with, but I hear this over and over again. So front yard design issues. Most of the time, entry walks, not that interesting, but you use it all the time, right? So why shouldn't it be beautiful? The front door is not easily seen or not welcoming. The front walkway is unbalanced, meaning there's often a pretty large house on one side, and the builder has scooted that walkway right up just to save money because it's the least amount of materials, right? So you have this huge structure on one side, little walkway, and then nothing on this side. So as you walk up, it just feels unbalanced, and you might not be able to articulate why it doesn't feel right, but that's why, right? So that's important. Probably more importantly for plants is when you have this scenario, we've got downspouts coming in, this area tends to collect water. You know, you have a big roof, water's coming off your roof, and builders could very easily put sleeves underneath this walkway so water can get out. They won't, right, at the time. So water gets trapped there. So you might think, okay, I've looked at my light conditions, I'm putting in the right plants here, but they're still not doing well, and they're just drowning, right, because water can't get out of that. So it's harder to fix after the fact. If you're having a house built, ask your builder to do some sleeves to help get that water out.
They plumb the gutters down now by code. They go down on new houses.
Right, which is interesting, and as long as they're getting it out, but then hopefully it outlets right away, right, because
and you also have to clean them a lot.
Yeah, so older construction, they would take some of that drainage right out to the street, so water would come off your roof, go in that pipe, and outlet on the street. We don't want that, right? So, but that's a good point. So most people don't use their front yard, right? So that might start to give you some ideas. Well, how much? We still want it to look good, of course, but how much resources do we need to put out there? We'll come back around to that in a second. And then a lot of times it doesn't have a lot of personality or character. Again, like I said, driving down the road, I want people to know which house is mine. Right? Unfortunately, we run into this a lot. Like new subdivisions where the garage has been bumped out. Hopefully you guys don't live in an area like this, but sometimes that's where the most affordable housing is. This is particularly hideous. And design-wise, at this point, there's not a whole lot we can do, right? That means hopefully you can design something drop-dead gorgeous here, maybe here. Maybe you could do like a trellis or a vertical garden on this long blank wall as you walk up, but it's really unappealing, okay? So it's just something that we have to deal with. The other thing is builders will often do just the minimum size requirements, which makes it really frustrating for homeowners and designers. So even though all these houses have, in theory, a 2-car garage, right? With the size of vehicles these days and all the other stuff that gets put in the garage, like water heater and everything, no one can get 2 cars in there, right? So everybody ends up parking on the driveway, which is not a beautiful drive coming home from work, going to work. It's just not attractive at all. The other thing is the driveway, a 2-car driveway, the minimum dimensions is 20 feet. And so your 2-car driveway is probably 20 feet, which, yes, that actually does fit 2 cars on it. But when you open up your car door and you step out, most of the time you're in the grass. Really frustrating. Heaven help you if you're wearing heels, right? That's just a bad scenario. So what do you do at this point? A lot of people will just add, like if this is concrete, they can just add like brick runners on the side to give a little more width, and if you do it well, pick the right colors, it won't look like an afterthought, right? But it's frustrating. It just is one more thing that homeowners have to deal with when they've just bought like a new place. It's like, oh, this isn't working really well. Why'd they do that? Builders did it to save money, right? If you're building from scratch and want a little extra pizzazz in your front yard, are concerned with stormwater runoff and having a beautiful approach to your house, consider doing something different with your driveway, right? You can do straight-in runners, you can have little planting bits. That's all you need. The whole space doesn't need to be paved. Your car tires are on these runners, right? You can't do this with a curvy drive unless you're amazing at backing up. Straight is the only way to do that with this, right? All right, so some other good front yard examples. Your house is probably what you spent the most money on, right? So people like to show it off. You bought it because you liked architectural features on it. You typically want to bring attention to the front door, saying, here it is, welcome, except for like solicitors, right? They can move on, right? But you want people coming to your front door and feeling welcome, so I like how this is all lush and green, and then they did the spot of color here. And I have a friend who does this. She's got 2 big planters on either side of her steps going up to her porch, and she changes them out every year, right? So it looks different, and she likes that aspect. But I thought this was beautiful. Here's some other ones that I thought were beautiful. Good design, like when you can change direction or have some transitions, do something a little more interesting is always good. I like this one because even though there's a jog, someone could still walk straight from over where the picture's being taken up to the steps, right? If you do this super curvy walkway, people will hate that. No one likes walking like this, right, up to whatever, right? Not good. But these other ones look good. Attention is on the front door. It's inviting, it's welcoming, lots of interesting things to look at. It's all good. These are also good. This one is the least interesting. Functional, it still works. But there's got to be some weird reason why that fence was pushed way back up there. It's almost like wearing a turtleneck in summer. It's like, oh God, I just want to give that house some breathing room, right? But maybe they need the lawn space, right? So I try to tell my students, don't be judgy. You need to do some digging first. Like, why did they do that the way that they did? Maybe it's the only lawn space they have, right? So that would work for them. All right, and some other really nice front yards. I particularly like this one. It's slightly curvy. It widens out, so it's almost like a foyer. It kind of nicely transitions you to the house. This nice curvy walkway, but not too curvy. And then this one, we're all plant people, so like, yeah, the more plants, the better. And I love that there's like no turf here. I mean, very, very personal decision there. I don't know why I did that. Hang on. Oh, I just took that out. Okay, hang on. Oh, okay. So one other thing you'll see really often is plants, like foundation plants, that got too big. So foundation plants are the ones that are right up at the house, usually across the front, but also softening this corner. So where a house meets the ground, really visually harsh connection. Also the edge of buildings is also pretty harsh. So having tall green stuff on the corner softens it really nicely. And then low plantings is usually what we're striving for. But as you know, people will go to a garden center, they buy a plant, it's only this big when they buy it, right? And they're like, it's fine, I can keep it to size, I'll shear it back, but eventually it doesn't work and things get too big. And then you have to rip it out and start all over. Not the end of the world, but if you can avoid it, better. So read the plant labels, but my one caveat there is, with new cultivars, just be warned, like we really don't know how big they're going to get. Every cool new thing that I bought that said, oh, it's only supposed to get X big, it got like 3X, 4X, right? Maybe it's because we have a long growing season, or growers really had no idea. So I have some friends that are like, yeah, there are no dwarf conifers, none. They're just really, really, really slow growers, right? You just have to have patience, right? So. Simple foundation planting's fine, right? I like this, just straight across the front, a little taller at the corners to hide that corner, works just fine. But this is also nice, right? So there's more layers here, there's more color, inherently there's more seasonal change. So that just is different, right? Either approach is fine, it just depends on what you want, right? Totally up to you. So now, the front yard lawn, right? I'm not someone who's like totally against lawn in all of its forms, but I do think that we might want to start rethinking how much lawn we need in a front yard, right? If you're using turf for entertainment, overflow, kid playing area, turf, pets running around area, great. If you're using it, fantastic. If it's just this enormous front yard sea of green that you never step foot on, but that's requiring a lot of resources to keep it looking amazing, you might want to rethink if that's really important to you, right? In my mind, any plant that needs to be pruned once a week, way too high maintenance, right? And then if you want a nice lush stand of turf in this area, it has to be irrigated. That's just the way it is. I refuse to do that. I'm not actually a big fan of like built-in irrigation systems, because if you pick your plants wisely, they should eventually live on their own, right? Plants in nature don't need our help, right? So you need to choose wisely. This will need your help here. We're not quite warm season, we're not quite cool season. Almost any grass you pick, you're fighting against what it wants to do, right? So just rethink that. If you're using it, great. If not, basically it's a big monoculture, right? So if you can, and it's not realistic, there's a lot of people like, yeah, pollinators, we should just have people get rid of all their front yards. Like, not gonna happen, right? But you could put in like bed space, like, you know, planting beds that go around the perimeter, that reduces the amount of lawn, brings in some of that diversity. The issue is, we'll get to maintenance in a minute, but as not so great lawn spaces are in terms of maintenance, everybody can wrap their brain around how to do that, right? Yeah, my yard is all weeds, right? But as soon as you take out some of that lawn and put it into planting space, whether it's like other trees, shrubs, perennials, now that's really intimidating for someone who doesn't know plants. So, well, I don't really want turf, but I know how to take care of that. Now here's all this stuff, I don't know what they are, and I don't know how to take care of them. And there's a lot of weeds coming in there, right? So there's a lot of pretty squirrely issues we need to deal with. Luckily, there's this great place called the J.C. Ralston Arboretum where you can learn about stuff like that, right? All right, so one option, if you want to do this, is changing out some of your turf grass with an ornamental grass. So this is an ornamental grass. So there's like traditional lawn up here where students at Swarthmore are running around and is mowed regularly. But then they reduced some of their lawn and transferred it to big areas of ornamental grass where this is as tall as this gets. Right? It only gets like this tall, has that same beautiful lush green color. It will continue to fill in, and it just does its thing, and then it has these beautiful inflorescences in the fall. It goes dormant, you leave it standing, and then you cut it back once in late winter. That's it, right? So it's pretty expensive to change a landscape area to this, but once it's in and it takes hold, you're done, right? So it depends on where you want to, when you're going to be spending your money. All right, other front yard dues. Color is always welcoming. Let your personality fly. It's your yard. A lot of people live in areas with HOAs, Homeowners Association, and they're like, ugh, we have an HOA. They're actually not as bad. If you go through the bylaws and you look at what they're requiring in terms of planting, it might sound really stickler-ish, but just almost anything is actually fine, right? When I get a client who has HOA rules that they need to follow, I label my plan with that same verbiage. And so it's easy for the Homeowners Association to quickly approve that plan. It's not a big deal. If you ever hire a designer who says, oh, you have an HOA, I'm going to charge you more for the design, do not use that designer. I think that's rude. It's like they're penalizing you for where you live, right? It's unnecessary, right? I put this picture up here because Sometimes houses are close together and there's really no good way to screen another house. So your option then is to do something so colorful or so beautiful, whatever you find beautiful down here, so your eye goes here. We're not really paying any more attention to the house in the background. Thankfully, it's a neutral colored house. If it was like canary yellow, it'd be a little harder to do that. But the planting is beautiful. It looks welcoming, and our eye stays down here. So I thought that was a good example. All right, backyard design issues. This is also pretty big, horrendous deal in like newer construction areas, where your backyard, which is where you want to relax, enjoy, it's for your downtime, it's for your oasis, it's where you're relaxing with family and friends and playing with your kids. A lot of times there's multiple properties that butt up against it, right? And those houses are huge and there's no fence that will screen off those houses, right? This is a 6-foot tall fence. That's a lot of people, they're only allowed to go that high. Sometimes you can go 8-foot tall fences, that's still not gonna hide this, right? The woman who bought this house is like, well, I looked into getting like 20-foot tall southern magnolias and they'd have to crane them in. And, you know, after the fact, it was gonna be like $25,000 a tree. Right? Per tree, right? Even if I had a ton of money, that's not how I would spend it. That's ridiculous. She didn't do it, obviously, but it poses a real challenge, right? So tremendous lack of privacy, lack of appealing character, and the big thing, really poorly built outdoor things like decks and patios, right? So getting back to the privacy first, here's 2 different ways of screening, right? So this one, kind of modern, kind of cool, very built, does an effective job at screening off the neighbors, but we can still see the roof. It pretty much is an overt way to screen. It's like, all right, you're over there, I don't want to see your house. I don't want to see what you're doing in your yard. I don't have anything to do with you, right? Now, of course, that's just my interpretation of that kind of screening. But you could do that, if that's your taste, that's fine. But this also is a screening method. So this is just, we call it a mixed border. So there's trees back here, there's shrubs back there, there's deciduous stuff that loses its leaves, there's evergreens. So there's always screening here so you can't see the house behind, but it's much softer. And it's less obvious that it's a screen. It's just a nice end border to this property, right? So just 2 different approaches. Either is fine, whatever resonates with you the most. Now, all right, let's get back to these ill-sized patios. This is a patio. Who would want to hang out on this patio? Ha, yeah, it's terrible. So builders will always make them about this size. So typically, builders will put a 10 by 10 concrete patio on a new house. So that's the size. Those of you wondering, what is that square taped on the floor? This is 10 by 10, so I'm going to ask my new 9 friends in the front row to come up here and join me on my patio. Now, do not get near the hot grill. That's this. Right? So this rectangle is a grill. So don't get near it. It's hot. No, you're sitting on the grill. No, see? Yeah. All right. So now imagine you would want to sit. Right. So your chair's going to take a little bit more. We don't have time for you to drag your chairs up. Right. You've got a drink. You've got a plate of food. Is there enough room for us? No. Right.
Do line dancing.
What? No, you do not want to see me dance, right? 2 things: I will never do a public dance and sing. No, that would be a disaster. All right, so this is just my point, right? So even if it was half of you, it's just not big enough, right? And it's unattractive. All right, go back to your seats. Thank you. So what you need to be very, very aware of is, all right, when I'm using my deck and my patio, what do I want to do out there? Is it just for me? Do I want to have friends over? Do they need seats? Do I have a grill? And this is like kind of a large grill. I actually don't have one, so I was estimating, but some of them are big. I don't know if you know Bryce's and his slide with his grandkids. You're probably looking at his kids. I was looking at the grills like, yeah, that's that size. That was that size, right? So it's not an inviting place to stay, and it doesn't, to hang out, and it doesn't really function very well. Yeah, people could spill off right? So this has gravel around it, but there's a slight height difference. That's a trip hazard in my mind. And I would be the one to fall, right? I am really not very graceful. That would just be bad, right? It could just be turf, right? Turf is extra spillover space, that's great, but it just feels too crowded, right? So a lot of people, even if you're building it yourself, you're like, okay, I'm gonna do 10 by 10 to save money. If it doesn't work the way you want it to work, it's not well spent money, right? It's better to go larger. And so 10 by 10, too small. I wouldn't do anything smaller than 10 by 15, 15 by 15 is even better, right? That's much better proportions because it's not just the people space, but it's furniture. If you have a door that comes out onto this from your house, you need to clear a path for traffic. That takes up space, right? So you have to think through those things really carefully. These are some beautifully designed patios. And I also like them because they're not right up against the house. A lot of times when you have this, there's always going to be a shadow, or it's like if you're sitting on that patio, you've got this house looming up above you, it doesn't feel comfortable. But if you've got space, kick that patio farther away from the house. You've got more plants around you, it's softer, it's more inviting. If you're doing fire, yeah, better to have it farther away from the house. Just saying. Okay, so here's some little diagrams just saying, you know, here's a patio in plan view coming off of the house. You have to think about traffic, so don't put the table there. It has to be kicked over so you've got clear path of traffic. So you've got kids running out from the house into the yard, leave it clear. It's just kind of obnoxious to have to run around furniture, right? And then a lot of guidebooks will give you typical dimensions, but they're almost always going to be way too small or barely enough space, right? So go a little bit bigger, right? They're saying for a grill, you only need a 4.5 foot by 4.5 foot space. It's like, well, I don't know how hot you get your grill, but the parties I've been to, it's like, no, we need a little more people room around it. And also with chairs, it's not just the physical space of the chair, but like if I'm at a dining room table and I'm sitting, when I get up, that chair gets pushed back, right? So you need a little more square footage around that. So if you look at this, there's no space to get around those chairs at all. So add in more space. This is Will's patio, which is just beautiful, right? So this is a pathway that comes off of his deck. He's done this really cool spiral pattern, but you've got enough room to come through, but it's sized nicely where someone sitting here and someone sitting here can still have a very easy conversation. These were all found materials, so you didn't have to spend money there. And then he built a temporary gazebo structure out of bamboo just to see what it would feel like. He's like playing with, well, what is the spacing of the columns? How high? How open does it need to be? Once he was satisfied, then he built it permanently out of like a rough hewn cedar, right? But that was free material for him. He's like, well, let me just try this first, right? Really, really smart way to go about it. If you have a deck off the back of your house, those can pose certain challenges and opportunities. This to me just looks weird when you have a really high deck and you have this 4x4 post. It will hold that, but it just looks weird, right? It's better to bump it up and have like a 4x6 inch post. It just looks more solid. Tall decks create kind of weird spaces underneath. You can use it for storage, but no one wants to hang out there. And if you have windows like on this ground floor that look out underneath this, it's just a really dark view. It's just kind of weird. So, and then if you also have a tall deck, think about flight of stairs. It's actually really rude to do this. Builders will do this because it takes up the least amount of space, but you really shouldn't go more than 4 feet without giving someone a landing. And then you go another 4 feet and you give a landing. What if someone's up here and they start to fall? They're going to fall that whole way. There's a good chance they're going to fall the whole way. And what if someone's going up that has a hard time navigating stairs? A landing will give them a safe place to rest, right? Well worth the money to do that. Okay. Also, most decks really aren't that interesting, right? So you can do them much more interestingly. This is kind of to the nth degree. My students designed this and we built it for a client many years ago. Just pine, right? Regular boring pine here, and cedar here. The client here loved like oriental Asian influence, and she had seen a picture of this, but it was really expensive to buy. I'm like, we can make that, not a problem. And then one of my students wanted to try doing uplighting from underneath. So these are just the glass blocks that you can buy at a big box store, and we rigged a light source underneath. At the first house I had in Raleigh, I used this Master and Duba wood. There's another wood that's very similar called Ipe. So it's a tropical hardwood, much more interesting, right? So this naturally has this color to it. It's beautiful red. There's no staining here at all. And it's a much heavier wood. It's much denser. There's this wax in it, so it's supposed to resist water better, resist insects without chemicals, but it's very, very expensive. But if it's a space where you're going to be spending a lot of time, it's like totally worth it. And this will last longer than pine, right? So I'm, again, trying to use my money wisely. So all the underpinning on this deck that I built, all the posts, all the joists, is still just pine, right? Because that's the cheapest wood. And then only the decking, these steps, and the bench are the Ipe, right? And then you do a UV sealant on it. It's wet right now because it was dirty after construction, so I hosed it off. But you just put a UV sealant on it so it stays red, otherwise it will slowly weather to a gray. So if you do a wood like this, you just have to make sure that it's certified by the International Forestry Stewardship Council. So it comes from a managed forestry operation. They're not like harvesting in rainforests, right? But you should be able to, like at big box stores, you can actually, they'll have the tracking information and you can track back to where it came from. It's pretty interesting. All right. Now, like I said several times, I think at this point, I like being frugal with my money. Most people are in the same boat. When I teach, I try to save my students money with like the supplies they're buying. Just assuming that most students want to save money too, but I had one student when you're going, you know, Ann, some of us are doing quite well. Thank you very much. All right, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. Just going by my experience. But a lot of us try to be very creative, but also very frugal. And if we can reuse materials, we're also doing better things for the environment. So one book that I came across that I really, really love is called The Revolutionary Yardscape. And it's how to creatively and beautifully reuse materials. Right? A lot of times you might see examples where someone has not done a good job of it, and it's like, I don't know that I would want that. But this fellow, Matthew Levesque, has done some really, really beautiful things and creative. One of my favorites is this, right? So he found this essentially a skeleton from a metal fabricator. Someone just needed a bunch of these C-shaped pieces. So unlike cookie dough that you can like mush back together, roll it out, cut out some more, once they're done with this sheet, they're done, right? So the fabricator was discarding this and many others, and so Matthew used it as the railing for his deck. How cool is that? It's already rusted, right? So it has this protective coating on it. It's not going to rust anymore. Looks beautiful, right? He could have maybe like finished off the wood a little bit better, but I love that. And like the shadow potential of that would be amazing. And then everything in this walkway is recycled or salvaged, right? So he found these in a dumpster. He found like big metal pieces. So it's a beautiful walkway through a garden space. I just thought it was really attractive. It's warm. It's inviting. But it's beautifully put together because he deliberately thought through each piece, right? And then I wanted to throw these in here too. So just using old shutters, so he made some outdoor lighting. And then those of you who do garden, I like the Bryce has lost 20 pruners, or however many he said. I think we're all in the same boat. So I like having little storage areas around my yard. So I just stick little stashes of tools there so I don't have to cart them all over because, like I said, I'm kind of lazy. So I liked having this little tiny closet made out of shutters for like a couple tools, a couple shovels. So I thought that was really beautiful. All right, so in town, just in case you don't know, Craigslist is amazing for like garden materials. You can almost always find people like they're doing renovation projects in their yard, so they're ripping up a stone or brick patio, and they just need it hauled away, right? So they're like, hey, a lot of times, if you come and get it, it's free. Or it might be, if it's nice stone, like this was $600. This guy was unloading cinder block. $1 a piece, that's still kind of high because you can buy them new for like $167, but that's the same as I'm not going to drive to Fuquay. Like if you lived in Fuquay, maybe, but you can always find things like locally. There was a span of a year where this fellow he had like 3 pallets of the original granite sets, which are cubes of granite. They were original to Fayetteville Street. And just beautiful. They're usually really expensive, and he was selling them for a song. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't have storage, I don't have a use for them yet, but I really want them. I kept checking back in, and every so often I would check and he would still have it. And eventually he sold it all, but he sold it really, really cheaply. So Craigslist is a great source. Neighborhood listservs, wherever you're living, get on your neighborhood listserv. Almost every couple of weeks we'll have someone like this saying, hey, we're redoing our patio, we got 300 bricks, whoever messaged me first gets it. And you can see that I did message, like 59 minutes, they were already gone. So our neighborhood listserv is hopping, it's always busy. You can always get some materials from like Habitat Resale Store. I have a chicken coop and I'm doing the front with really cool old tiles, and I just go in there every couple months and see what cool ones they have. And they usually get frustrated with me to check out them. Really, you're just getting like 2 tiles, just go. And I don't even have to pay for like the 2 tiles. It's like, yes, yes. All right. And then also keep your eyes and ears open for random opportunities. Twice this has happened where I made a tour with my students to go check out a stone yard. And they're like, oh, by the way, this whole row is like 7 pallets of stone. They're like, someone ordered this. We can't return it, but we want it gone. If you guys want it, you can have it. Right? Or they'll deliver a whole pallet for 200 bucks. Right? So it doesn't happen often, but if you're just open to those things, sometimes it happens. Make a friend with someone at a stone yard saying, hey, if you ever got sale stuff or stuff you're trying to get rid of, call me first. Right? All right. I'm going to be way over time. You said your talk could be short. Okay. Try to fight me, I'll win. All right, so creating a new bed. Really quickly, one of my huge pet peeves is when someone puts in a new bed and it doesn't relate to anything else. It's just this sea, like this beautiful bed of plants, but floating in a sea of turf that doesn't relate to anything else in the yard, right? I don't know why that's a thing, but it is. But it's actually really easy to make it fit in, right? So let's just say this orange area is like a new bed you want to put in. This darker green, existing stuff you already have. This bright chartreuse green is lawn, right? So you can think very carefully about what shape you want it to be, and you can tie it in. It can either be part of the existing bed, or it can be standalone. So here's a cool square one. It relates to the square lines around it, right? You can have this cool kidney bean thing, part of the existing bed, or pull it away. But this now fits in because this line is parallel to this line. It looks like it should be there. Same thing with this round one. So it's just a very deliberate thinking about what shape should it be, how does it relate to its neighbors, right? It's actually not that difficult. I tell my students when they show me plans, if I could put my finger on that new thing they're putting in, and if I could actually sort of move it around, if it doesn't impact the design in any way, shape, or form, that's not a well-designed thing, right? But by having those lines parallel and having that kind of mimic the same shape, it looks like it's a puzzle piece, and it looks like they could fit together if I push them closer together. That makes things relate to one another. So that's really important. If you do the standalone thing, I would also give some thought to, well, how wide is that pathway? Ideally, is it just one pass with a push mower, or is it 2 passes? Don't make it something odd that you got to go back and forth and you got to weed eat the edge. There are easier ways to go about it. Okay? All right, low maintenance landscapes. This is a white whale, and it's kind of a mystery thing. I have to laugh when my students say, well, I've created a design that is low maintenance. It's like, really? Fabulous! Firstly, of course it's going to be low maintenance. I doubt there is a single person in here who would ask a designer for a high maintenance landscape. Come on, I want to be out there mowing, pruning, weeding every spare minute of my free time. No one is going to ask for that. So of course it's going to be low maintenance, but what does that mean? Like, what's something you love to do in your garden? a task? Like a task.
Drink wine.
Drink wine, okay. Is that a task? I don't think that's a task for anybody, right? No, we like to do that. But like, who here likes to mow? Right? So, true gardeners, right? So inevitably I will get clients, some of them do like to mow. They're like, oh come on, it's the only time I get. I put on my headphones, I put on my music, it's my quiet time away from my spouse, whatever. They love to mow, right? I hate to mow. I'm normally a very hands-off person in my landscape, but man, when my daylilies are done, I don't know if it's like an OCD thing, but I love to snap off the blooms, yank the stalk when they're done. I love that, right? So what maintenance means for each person is different, right? So you need to figure out, what do I like to do? What do I do? What do I don't like to do? What's not so terrible, right? So one of the best things you can do is figure out those things that are higher maintenance. Like I'll have clients and students who say, we want vegetable gardens, but we want low maintenance. I'll tell you right now, vegetables is not low maintenance. It's high maintenance. It's way too high for me. But if you have to have them, the best thing you can do is put anything that requires high maintenance, like anything that you need to pay attention to at least once a day, should be where the people are hanging out. So in permaculture, we organize designs by zones, right? Zone 1, like zone 0 is where the house is, but zone 1 is where the people are, right? So maybe I would have a veggie garden along the front path, right? So then as I'm going to and from my car several times a day, I can see what needs to be picked. I can see if something's wilted that needs to be watered, right? So it just makes sense. Plus, it might make some tasks not seem like chores. If you put the vegetable garden way far away and someone who has to go maintain it, they feel like they're being exiled. Where you're in the patio having your glass of wine, whoever is taking care of your veggie garden is like 100 feet over. You're like, oh, well, I don't get to enjoy my wine, right? So put things requiring high maintenance together. And things that need the least amount of stuff farther and farther out, right? Smaller solutions, buying plants. So we talked about the foundation plants. We are so lucky to live here. There's an amazing amount of plants that grow here and so many cultivars. If you wanted something that only got to the very bottom of these windows, there's a cultivar of something that will only get that high, right? Seek out those plants so it's less work for you, right? One of the big issues we have is when you buy plants, you want to know how much they will spread, right? What's their ultimate size? They will not be that when you buy them, right? So when you put in, here's a new plant, here's a new plant, here's a new plant, eventually they'll fill in together, right? But before they do, how do I handle that? Because if you've gardened here for a while at all, this leftover space, what will it be? Weeds, right? And I don't know about you, but after this rain that we had, I swear I was keeping up with my yard, and all of a sudden it looks like I haven't been out there in a month, right? So a lot of times what I'll do is it's the only time I'll use annuals. I'll put annuals, I'll direct sow some annuals, I'll get some vines out there that will die after a year, or I might put in perennials that I'll move to another garden bed later just so it all gets filled up, right? And that's usually only because I'm not buying bigger plants. You could buy bigger plants and that's not an issue, but again, I'm trying to usually conserve money. We won't talk about that, right? I expected a unanimous, but again, putting in plants that you're just shearing back for no reason, it's like, if you didn't want to do that, put in something smaller, right? That just makes sense. All right, so going back to Pete Udolph, right? One of the reasons why I love this, this I just think is so beautiful. There's so much going on in there. Like I said, I'm from Illinois, so anything that's like prairie, I think it's in my genes. There's not really a lot of prairies left, but I just love this. The other thing I like about it is if I can't get to my garden to take care of it, if a weed pops up, you don't notice it. Exactly, exactly. Brilliant, right? Plus, he plants so many plants that really weeds don't have an opportunity to come up, right? So I think that's another reason why it's brilliant design. One other thing Will and Gina, that I think is brilliant is they do this thing called gardening by subtraction. Right? So they've actually, in their parkway, they put in a lot of things that actually seed freely because it's They prefer to go in and they can pull stuff. It's less energy spent for them than planting something and then praying for weeks for it to like do well, right? They'd rather just come in and pull some easy things. So they've got rose campion is this pink, there's larkspur, delphinium in there. They've got some Missouri primrose. That stuff they just pull out. Then for their maintenance, they would rather spend their maintenance hours doing that than other gardening tasks. That's easy, right? All right, there is a handout that I just packed a ton of information on it that talks about the edibles that are easy to grow here, and instead of the ones that are hard, so we refer to that. Along with the maintenance, a lot of times new gardeners will go to a garden center and ask for plants that they cannot possibly kill. Right? We want the toughest nails thing, something that I can't possibly kill. Unfortunately, those plants like privets or ligustrums, Russian olive, there's a list on your handout, those are all really invasive. Right? And they will spread, birds will spread them in the woods. Please don't buy those. I wish garden centers and big box stores wouldn't sell them, but don't use those. There's a list on your handout. Don't use those. Seriously, I mean it. Don't ever. And then don't fall into the trap of someone saying, oh, but it's native. Right? So we have this it's a beautiful native grass called northern sea oats. It is beautiful, but if you plant one, within a few short years, your whole garden will be this guy. And you'll constantly spend your time weeding it out. It spreads by runners and by seed. So it's native, but it's a very happy native, and it just, whatever. So we don't want that. Okay, stormwater management. I'm trying to think what other topics I have so I can like eliminate one. I can do the same. I can like share my PowerPoint because we're going over a little bit. But let me just really quickly hit upon stormwater management. Okay, we'll do this. I'm going to show you a couple slides from this bank, right? And then I'm going to take you to the very end. So the stormwater is huge here. Anyone here from Portland, Oregon? Okay, so let me ask, who gets more rain, Portland, Oregon, or us? We do. Just by an inch or two. But we do. It's actually just west that gets way more rain than Portland. But we get about 50 inches of rain a year here. When I moved here in 2001, we got 42 inches, like clockwork. Then we went into a drought, and since then, it's been creeping up, and it has been a consistent 50 inches for the last several years. Yeah, and so we actually have a lot of water to handle. So when I was little, my grandparents would drive me around, and my grandmother loved looking at houses, and she told me, never ever buy a house that sits lower than the road, ever. And she was thinking, just from an aesthetic standpoint, it just looks weird, it's not welcoming. But now that I'm in the field that I am, it's like, you will constantly be fighting water, right? There's no way to make this usable. You could try terracing it, but you don't have a lot of horizontal space to do that, so regardless, it would be expensive. You're still going to have water problems. Who wants to try to navigate this driveway when it's icy or snowy or wet? It's just a mess, right? Don't. There's a lot of weird developments in the area, so before you buy, choose super wisely. So I'm going to end with this story, right? So I'm going to show you a couple slides here, and then quickly go to the very end of my presentation. So this gentleman called a couple years ago, and he apologized right off the bat. He was like, I'm so sorry. I'm so embarrassed to be calling. My wife and I just moved to the area. We couldn't find a house for a long time. We looked at so many, and we finally saw this house, and it was perfect. So we just bought it. We didn't even look at the yard. Right? That seems really weird to us, because usually we look at the yard first. Right? So he's like, but I can't use my backyard at all. I'm like, tell me about it when we come take a look. So this is what he had. So enormous house. The lot would have been a good size, but the house took up most of the lot. It was like a 4,000 plus square foot house. Then his backyard was about 30 feet deep, was all, right? So as soon as you walked out, there was one drainage way, and then there was this weird hump, and then up here is another drainage way. So you can see how these houses are here. They're at a higher elevation. So all the water from those yards passed through this gentleman's yard. right? So we can't really stop that. It's already been developed, right? We can't change that. We can't impede water. We can't cause a bigger problem for someone else. But we're like, he's like, what can we do? And so here's another view. And privacy was also an issue, right? So everybody's houses lined up. So his screened-in back porch lined up with his neighbors. And they started doing like weird stuff. He's like, I don't want to see that. So what do we do? What do we do? And he also had what he thought was really, really strict HOA restrictions on what they were allowed to plant. And he's like, look, they said I can't even plant a hedge, like of one species. I'm like, well, who would want that anyway? Right? But yeah, looking out here is hideous, but there's much more clever ways of screening. So he wanted an oasis back there. He was the plant guy of the house, his wife not so much, but he wanted the backyard to be usable for the family. He wanted to create privacy, fix the water issues, and that was really tricky. And to make that space usable, it's like, oh, you're probably looking at another $70,000. You know, I know, because we had to do a retaining wall and regrading and then planting, but we had to let all the water that was currently coming through here still come through. Right? We can't obstruct that in any way. All right, so you'll just have to look at the PDF. This is really cool stuff. Oh, okay, but really quickly, let me show you this. So water catchment is important. Now this is going to sound like all over the place. But adding a tank to collect water off your roof to use for irrigation later, really smart. Like we get precipitation throughout the year. We don't have like one wet time and then a really, really dry time. It always rains around Christmas here because normally it would be snow. If we were a little bit farther north, it would be snow. We get a lot of rain. But those big tanks are expensive. The little, whatever, gallon, this size, that doesn't collect anything. Yeah. If you have this in your yard, even I don't want to live next to you. Right? So here's how. So my house is 1,000 square feet, right? So a 1 inch of rain falling on that roof will give me 630 gallons of water. If we're getting 50 inches of rain, that's like 30,000 gallons of water that we could be collecting, using to irrigate, so we don't have to use city water. But a lot of these, they're just ugly and they're too small. They would fill up like this, right? So you have to go bigger. These are expensive. Right? You can expect to pay $1 per gallon of collecting with the plastic ones. So this one is probably like a $900 tank. And then you probably have another $300 in shipping, right? So they're expensive, but they're worth it. But in Raleigh, they have a Raleigh Rainwater Rewards, and I put this website on your handout. They will reimburse you up to 90% the cost of any rainwater catchment thing you put in, whether it's a big tank like that, whether it's a rain garden, or a green roof. Right? You just have to do the form that's online. They'll approve it. You go spend your money, and they will reimburse you. Durham has a similar program. I put that website on the handout as well. Chatham and Orange counties were kind of squirrely. They're like, well, we might give you labor, but we're not giving you money. Right? So wherever you are, you just need to like dig a little bit and see what reward program. So that's important. That will save you a ton of money. Oh, we're not going to talk about landing design. Oh, sorry. All right, let me take you to this. Such good information. Oh my God. So we could be here all day. I don't know what I was saying. Oh, okay, so here's another. I'll just like stop and talk about a few. So this is a James Hitchmore design. So he's a British designer. He does all of his designs by seed. There's no planting design. He does like a proportional amount. He's like, okay, big things, I want fewer of those seeds. Little things, I need a lot of those seeds. And he sows by hand, cheapest way to install a garden, right? Bree Arthur, who lives down in Fuquay, she also direct sows, and that's so cheap, and it grows so easily here. He's also found that he has hardly any weeds, because there's so many seeds that come up. Right. There's no room for the weeds, right? So that was brilliant. Built gardens are more ecologically diverse because we're demanding seasonality, so it's automatically better for reducing pests and diseases, bringing in pollinators, supporting pollinators, and providing as much year-round interest as possible, right? So he has a really great book out called Sowing Beauty. And one of the best things you can do for planting is to ensure that you're thinking about spring, summer, fall, and winter, is do a little chart like this. I mean, this is a big one. But don't worry about this column, but just say plant name, and then at least have spring, summer, fall, and winter. And I put a chart on your handout. So as you're shopping for plants, you can write down when they're supposed to be blooming or when there's winter interest. And you can make sure that you have all the gaps covered. Right? If you try to keep it all in your brain, it's too much information. Right? So if you do it graphically like this, you got it. So I do this when I'm designing, but then I also use it as a communication tool when I'm presenting to clients, so I can see you've got something going on in all seasons, and they can understand it really quickly. Okay. Talk about animals. Oh my God, so much good information about talking about. It's terrible. I don't know what I was thinking. All right, so going back to this story, so I ended up doing exactly what he wanted. So the HOA was kind of, it sounded pretty severe, but it really wasn't. So when I do a plan, this was a plan I ended up doing for him. So I gave him like a little, this was a sunroom that he already had, gave him like a little patio. This is a retaining wall, so he can step up to this higher elevation. So we just pushed some of that earth back. But we left that back swale, it's actually here. And I made it a long rain garden, so some of the water infiltrated, but a lot of it would still continue on its merry path. And then there were arbors to give him a little privacy nook. There's one here, and there's a tree canopy over here. And then lots of really tall plants around the perimeter, and gingers and other evergreens, but not like a single file row of something. So the HOA is like, well, absolutely, this is totally fine. They proved it right away, right? So it sounded like he would have problems, but most people don't, right? You're a designer, or you just have to label the plan or defend it just like the way the HOA has said in their restrictions. And so he's just started construction, so they just put in the wall, and then he hadn't had any plants planted yet. So I didn't bother taking pictures, but it will look like this. So it will be full, it will be blooming, it still handles all the water runoff. We ended up adding another little drain here, and then I'm hoping that he gets one of those big tanks for over here because he's got a lot of roof situations. So, okay. Well, lots of stuff we didn't get to, but I will have Chris make the PDF of the PowerPoint. It was really only like 150 slides. 141. But I tell you, before this morning it was 200. I'm like, okay, I don't think I can get through that, but I'm pretty sure if I talk really fast. So anyway, but I hope you have a little bit more information now. You can go out, just try things. Like Bryce said, it's all about experimenting. Think through really what you want and need. Before you spend your like big dollars, make sure those things are right, and the planting is really flexible. You will move plants around, you'll try different things, but it should be fun, right? And as you start putting in your plants, just take on as much that you can do in a weekend. Right? I do this thing at my house called a plant audit. I cannot buy more plants than I will actually plant that weekend or that day. Otherwise, I know, I learned the hard way. Otherwise, I have a ton of potted things sitting out, and then it's way more work for me to keep them alive. And I've had too many. Exactly. So nope, if I buy something, I got to plant it that day or that weekend. Words to live by. So go forth and have fun with your own home landscape.